All right, welcome to Rebels with a Heart. We are thrilled to be joined today by some amazing leaders, and we're going to jump into an action-packed conversation here. So, with that, I'd like to welcome our audience and welcome our guest, starting with Devin. So, Devin, please introduce yourself to the Rebels community.
Hey, Rebels community. I'm really excited to be here. I've been a fan of the show, the podcast. I usually listen to it after it's been recorded, but I'm really excited to be here. I'm the VP of HR at a company called Nerd United. And I have to throw this in there as well. I'm really excited. I am a co-founder of another little venture called Nerd Labs that provides talent solutions to companies who need it, who perhaps can't, budget in an entire HR team, but really want the same level of commitment and support. And so I'm located here in Utah. Really, really love here in Utah. You're never going to pry me away. Father of 4 kids, wonderful wife. She actually got the kids out of my hair today so that they're not sitting on my lap.
Yeah.
But definitely really excited to be here and to talk about HR and some other things.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Devin. I'm excited you're here as well. And going over to Lars, welcome.
Yes. Good afternoon, Derek, and certainly to the Rebel community. My name is Lars Mins. I'm the Chief HR Officer for Mercedes-Benz North America. So we're the marketing and sales division for the company. Really a pleasure to be here. I've gotten to know Derek over the last year to 18 months through his Life Guides company. Remarkable company, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to work together at some point. But I've been with my company for 9 years. Really have enjoyed this run that we're on, and we're transforming. But as much as the company is transformed, I think my leadership, or at least my development, has also continued in that vein. And I would say this, and hopefully we get a chance to talk about it. As much as I am expected to perform professionally, I think there needs to be an equal task for me at home. I have an 18, 16, and 14-year-old. And as much as they've developed, I feel like I'm due for development myself. Kids never stay the same, and so parents should certainly be equal to the challenge. And I've been married for 22 years, but happy to be a part of the conversation today and really look forward to it.
Awesome. Welcome, Lars. We're thrilled you're here and looking forward to the conversation as well. So, William, welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here today, and I've known Derek and Rebels for some time now, a few years, and I'm just definitely excited as Devin and Lars is for the conversation today. Chief Diversity Officer for Kroll. Kroll is financial services, not only financial advisory and risk management, but global. 35 countries and territories around the world. We have about 6,500 employees that deliver that for us. My personal background in this space spent 12 years in human resources, chief people officer, et cetera, and the last 18 years in DE&I. Like the other gentleman here, I have 2 kids as well, but I also have a grandson. So
Nice.
Lars, something to look forward to. My grandson is 3, and just excited to be a part of the conversation today, Derek.
Awesome. Well, we're thrilled you're here, William, and for all of you being here. And again, Derek Lunston, I'm the host of Rebels of the Heart and also the president and chief culture officer of Life Guides, which is a technology platform that connects people who have been through different life experiences, events, and challenges to be guides for people going through those same experiences, events, and challenges, helping them to thrive in their lives, in their work, in their personal lives, wherever it may be in different aspects. So with that, thrilled to have the conversation. The topic of the show, or the title of the show, is one that I think is the surface of what we're going to explore today, which is HR in an automated age. And I think that language in of itself is kind of an interesting use of the term, because to the idea of what we're talking around the evolution of human beings and our roles and talent at the time where there's a technological convergence that's happening right now around artificial intelligence, around blockchain and decentralized solutions, around the next generation of technology and tools that are coming in. When you think of wearables and interconnected devices in our cars, in our homes, and our businesses, we're on an early chapter of the next chapter, if you will, around how does tech influence business and our lives. And so with that, I'm going to let each of you, and any of you in any order that feels aligned, share your just initial impressions on what you're seeing right now as it pertains to people in this really unique point in history, and how your organizations or you personally are adapting to prepare for this shift that's happening. And like I said, there's no order here. Feel free to chime in and riff on it, and I'll jump into some other questions from there. But I will also say, as a dad of 3 young kids, and we all have a lot of kids between us, this is something that weighs on my mind personally a lot as well, in addition to what we're doing professionally. So, gentlemen,
I'll jump in real quick. I would say for me, there's excitement around it. Before this conversation, I think Lars was talking about how he's seen a shift in specifically with HR in how companies think about HR, how companies utilize HR, and to me, we're trying to embrace this shift. In an automated world, for me, I'm like, you know what? If I can automate all of the more mundane tasks that HR has to handle, and again, I'm just talking specifically HR right now, so much more time can be spent on strategic initiatives, helping leaders to level up their management skills, focusing on best practices, doing the things that mitigate risk. If so much time isn't having to be spent doing the transactions that maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago when I first got into HR, that I would spend hours doing, and then always felt guilty because, man, I wish I could be more strategic. We always want that seat at the table. I think embracing the automation and focusing on that, kind of just my initial dump of thoughts here is that I view it as a good thing. I view it as a way that folks can be a lot more strategic. There can be more conversations. There can be more dialogue around things within the workplace, growing the business, scaling things. So it's kind of the initial take that I have.
Awesome. Thanks, Devin.
Yeah, I would echo a bit of what Devin said and maybe take it a step further. I do believe all of us, and all of us meaning all of us that show up to work in a work setting, be it the company we founded or the company we work for, there's a pioneering spirit that we all have. And I think people want to make good on that pioneering spirit. I like to think of it as the currency that an employer should provide to their employees to give them the chance to be strategic, but Devin, maybe a little differently, to think. It's the one thing that I think is so missing nowadays, and it's probably the secret element that if you can unleash thinking amongst your workforce, I think you have a fantastic opportunity to beat the competition, to be innovative, but also to lead certain trends. But we just don't have the time to think, and specifically in HR, compression of time is one of the things that is so elusive. That if I could just give one gift to my employees, it would be the time to think. But the vehicle to get that done is the automation. We're going through a bit of a transformation within HR and Mercedes globally. We're moving to a platform, but in addition to that platform, there are multiple elements that we'll embark on. And the biggest thing is the mindset. I think you can automate, but I think as much as you can bring about a certain mindset for your employees to show up every day feeling that they can create their own value, which in turn exports value back to the company, I think you're relentless at that point, and your organization becomes equally as dominant in the marketplace. So it's a long time coming. Devin, you hinted to it. That's exactly what I meant. I think we owe it to move away from convention within HR, and I think it's time for us to really think about the front foot and constantly be thinking about how we bring about that automation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lars. I'll just jump in right there where you left off, and the point about this evolution. As HR executives, we've gone through this, what I'm calling this evolution from personnel management to human capital strategies, and now we're at a point of total inclusion, right? And so when we talk about total inclusion and everyone having a voice, and then leveraging technology, there's a huge component of, again, employee engagement and people feeling a part of the whole as we move into this place of total inclusion, as I like to say. There's a lot of organizations that are, using bots and, to, automate some of the systems for communication with the employees. Just in that whole tech lens and from an AI standpoint, there are a lot of pieces that, and I say pieces, but there are a lot of elements of the employee that should be considered or needs to be considered. And so big consideration for that is employees who don't celebrate birthdays, simply put. A lot of times the bot or the tech is set up to auto celebrate birthdays or announce anniversaries, right? And so a lot of times if there's a situation where specific religions individuals who don't celebrate their birthdays, because I, for one, have made that faux pas to say happy birthday to someone who doesn't celebrate. And this is just a part of that technology lens that we are going to have to ensure that we understand our employees to a point where we can also leverage technology to be in our favor for what we would consider exceptions. But I'm not going to consider it exception. I'm going to consider it back to total inclusion, making sure that we have those voices for everyone.
It's beautiful said. So I have a couple questions that are kind of coming up from what you all shared. And I'll put them in two categories. So one is related to time, which we'll come back to in a little bit. And then one is related to what I'll call the different paths of how this technological automation conversations evolved over the last couple of years. Lars, I'm going to start with you for one moment, just because you think about 5 years ago when there was the initial discussion around AI or automation, it was the focus on robotics. It was the focus on tasks. It was actually talking a lot about jobs that would be disrupted in manufacturing facilities, in other locations where there was a lot of that tactical manual work that was happening. And could we do it more efficiently, faster, cheaper? And there was a concern at that point of people, how will this affect my jobs? We've seen now 5 years of this play out. And so I'm sure you have a point of view on that. At the same time, William, we now, and Devin as well, when we think about the current day, especially of artificial intelligence, we now see AI taking on creative jobs, replacing even the possibility of replacing lawyers and writers and filmmakers and developers and all these other careers that you would normally, that 5 years ago were not even on the radar, are now being, quote unquote, imposed upon by this technology. And that's informing that conversation. So the reason I'm reading this painting this narrative is we have a little bit of historical perspective now of this conversation in a different lens, and how it's showing up in now a new lens. What do we have to learn from that as we think about communication with our colleagues, when we think about driving change and the vision around this, how this works, integrating this in our businesses, both from what you're seeing today and also from where we come from? And Lars, I'll let you start with that since I directed it to you first.
Sure, Derek. I think it's an interesting point. I made the comment, and maybe I'll regret it, or maybe I'll reflect on it or use it as a point of leverage, a point of emphasis. But I think in some respects, technology can't get here fast enough. If you think about it, the American workforce in the last 20 years, the labor participation rate has dropped by 5 percentage points. It's gone from 67% to 62%. And any company you talk to today, in a normal environment, they actually are struggling to fill jobs.
Yeah.
And we don't have a promise of the future. There's nothing that says that we will create more kids, although the four of us have done a fine job, sounds like. but there's no trend. There's nothing coming to reverse the trend that we've seen. So the technology can't get here fast enough. But I want to go back to what we talked about earlier. A little bit of it is about time. I mean, I think if you can give the human being, and I don't want to be far out in saying this, but I think if you can give someone time to think, time to be creative, I think you just ushered in, or you opened the door to innovation for in any respect. And I think there's a huge opportunity we have in front of us to look at what that time means. There's certainly some fear around, but I think some of it is a prognosis that we've yet to realize. I mean, yes, we've been fortunate enough to remove some expense or remove certain jobs that we otherwise would have done differently because of technology. At the same time, too, I don't know that there's anything on the horizon that says that X, at a significant clip, X number of jobs will be removed. I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah,
I'm sure. I mean, again, going back to prognosis, that there's the likelihood that could happen. But I think as much as we are looking to remove jobs, we're also looking to repurpose those jobs and do something else with, because we still need to think through what sort of impact it would be. We need to think about our competition. We need to think about what our customers want. And I don't know that all of that can be laid at the feet of technology. I'm no expert on it, but just from where I sit, I think I would say, as I started out, some of the technology can't get here fast enough.
Yeah. Thank you, Lars. William, Devin? Thoughts?
Yeah, I'll simply jump in and say I agree because where we headed, we need it. We need it, quickly to help us process work. There is a big need with the AI. I'd say a big need, but a big need to address as we look across. And I'm blending my HR and DEI cap on this. Is that there are certain places that we're, even here at Kroll, where we work in through some of the investigative pieces that we do within our business lines, understanding the nomenclature of culture and the words within culture. I've seen chat and other tools do a phenomenal job at recasting, right? And recasting language, recasting stories, recasting people, places. But one of the things that we will need to account for is that the cultural lens. And I'll give just one small example of this. I could give a lot of examples because, depending on if you're in Utah or South Carolina, where I grew up, or here in New York City, nomenclature sounds a lot different. All right. And so, but we're now relying on technology to give us a generalized story. But in some regard, in some work that we do here, auntie in parts of Africa is very different than auntie or my aunt here is relative to family, not a friend. And so some of those things, as we move in this growing in the evolution of technology, those cultural considerations in nomenclature can play pretty heavily, especially in the place of, any type of law firms and our HR policies and how we go about assessing for employee relations issues or onboarding. And so there's a few things that come to play. And that's notwithstanding pronouns and other things that we're faced with in this work as well.
Got it.
Awesome. I'll jump in. I have a few thoughts, but first I want to just say, like, already I am just loving listening to Lars and William discuss their points of view, and I share very, very similar points of view. There's this I'm sure that both of you have done many an exit interview. There's one rolling around in my head as we talk about this from several years ago, where an employee was leaving great terms and great performer, and in the conversation, obviously I was like, what could we have done differently?
Yeah.
And you both have kind of touched on this idea of time. It's like, look, I'm super talented, which he was very, very talented, but I am bogged down with so many of these tasks that we can't automate yet, but I wish we could so that I can innovate. And it just continues to amaze me as we're able to give that, as Lars and we both talked about, we give that time back to employees to innovate. That's when some of the best ideas come from. I remember, 15 years ago I worked at a place, we had a high turnover rate. It was just, we had a job that was large population of our employees was very entry level. A lot of college students, they'd come and work and then they'd go and they'd come back. And so we had a lot of turnover. And with the turnover, we got a lot of unemployment forms to fill out. And I spent hours filling out these forms. Back then it was an HR team of 2. So it landed on us. And I kept thinking, gosh, if we could automate this process, how much more time could we spend on developing employees? How much more time could we spend on figuring out what ideas are out there? Because that's part of it too. I mean, from the HR lens, if I have more time, I can go out and help the business to suss out some of the ideas that employees have they're not able to share. Sit down with employees and really have the opportunity to, like Lars has mentioned a couple of times, just think and think out loud and really to, kind of brainstorm. And so I was kind of rolling around in my head, and definitely not here to pitch this thing on my shirt, but thinking about this thing that we've created, it's really about, and what we're doing is really about embracing that technology and sort of integrating developers. I mean, if you think about all of the AI out, that's another good example of developers feeling like, man, this is going to take my job someday. So this thing that we're creating, it actually works in tandem with and illustrates and brings forth the proficiency level of a developer. So it's not, is AI going to take over my job, or do I continue as a developer to fight against it? But rather, how can I utilize AI? How can I, machine learning and all of these new technologies, to illustrate the value that I bring and to enhance my own level of proficiency and efficiency? And so, just as an example, that a lot of what we're talking about today really, really resonates, because now is the time. We need these advancements more than ever, but we also need to be strategic about how and where we implement and use the technologies.
Yeah. Hey, Derek, if you don't mind, I just want to make one other point, because I think sometimes I've gotten caught up in what the value proposition of the technology. But I think in a human centric way, what technology is, I hope it does, is bring about a sense of empowerment to our employees. And I think at the core of what they would want, to keep them highly engaged, to keep them loyal to the company, to keep them committed, and to shift the balance sometimes of this hierarchy of us versus them, employer versus employee. Technology, I think, has a chance to bring about a certain level of empowerment. But in order for it to do so, we have to get out of their way. I mean, we have to embrace these ideas and these various thoughts. So
Yes.
I'll just sort of put that on the table.
I'm glad you did, because that's where I was going to go. So down the rabbit hole we go on the time front, which is going to lead us back into that exact topic, Lars. So when we think about freeing up, quote unquote, time of, automating certain tasks, giving people more space to do other higher value, quote unquote, work, that in terms of how you can spend that time, even into how we look at the broad spectrum of our work, and I'll call our life week, right? Because that's another combination right now, is that what we've seen over the last few years, I think, has been one of the great lessons of the pandemic, is that where people are working in whatever way they can work, that in terms of hours, there's greater flexibility around time management or time autonomy. Companies are giving the ability for employees to work in their most productive hours to address certain family needs, especially as we look at the data around caregiver support, for example, as we look around the responsibilities of parents in different stages and how they balance their productive and then back to their highest windows of productivity. Now we get into wearables and seeing when we can be the most productive and looking at team productivity, all these different pieces. It raises interesting questions around how where does the burden of responsibility fall? Back to your comment about employer versus employee. How do we create adequate forums for learning, for new skill development, for the ability to learn how to think, for example, how to think creatively, how to create centers of innovation, as a point of view. At the same time, technology has allowed us to breathe into our lives in unique ways. Our phones are connected with us round the clock. The idea of leaving the office to go to your kids' soccer games is no longer, is not possible, because this follows us everywhere, right? And so we're always connected. And so and there's a lot of discussion right now. I mean, I saw an interview a month ago where Jamie Dimon was talking about this, that the responsibility falls to the employee. The employer gives lots of resources. It's up to you as an individual to make use of those resources, and up to you to set appropriate boundaries. But we know in the workplace, deadlines, key issues for how the business performs, our margins for success or failure can be small. Like, that tension is something we're all trying to figure out. So that's another piece I think we're just starting to really have a conversation about. I think that, the prolonged burnout from the pandemic and from that change is starting to fall away. I think people are starting to be more open to, okay, let's set the new. And at the same time, we're all figuring it out as we go. So what are your thoughts on kind of that landscape when you think about kind of those competing issues? Anywhere you could take that question again. That's not directed to anyone specifically. That was to any of you. So
I'll hop in. I think about this one a lot. Like the phone thing that you talked about, like you don't really ever leave work. And you mentioned boundaries, right? Like we're automating everywhere we possibly can. And part of that automation means that we're reachable, we're way more reachable than we ever have been. And you know, the resources that we're given can really help us be efficient. But, I think that on the other kind of side of the spectrum, if we're not capable of setting boundaries, if we're not capable of kind of governing ourselves with the technology that we have, with the way that we've become reachable all the time. I think about a little 30-second story here. I was working at Tesla. I plan, and if you know anything about Tesla, it's go, go, go all the time, be reachable nonstop. That's just kind of the culture there. And I had scheduled a family trip to Yellowstone, and I was like 6 months in advance, like, hey, everybody, can we gone? Haven't been to Yellowstone since I was a little boy. Super excited about this one. My 4 kids, all that stuff. We get there. We stayed in West Yellowstone. And because of that, my inability at the time to set boundaries, being reachable all the time with my phone and other resources, in 7 days, I went into the park twice. I stayed back at the hotel. I mean, and so it is this idea of like being able to be efficient, and these things are making us more efficient, but does it lead us to burnout? And I'll be honest, that's probably like the last straw for me to be like, you know what, maybe this type of hustle culture, if that's what you want to call it, that was kind of last straw for me. And I came to the realization that the boundaries in this world that we now work in, because I didn't have to worry about that before. When I first started in HR, and I'm sure that all of you can relate, I didn't have to worry about that. When I left and I was done, unless there was an emergency and I got a phone call. But now there's this pressure that we put on ourselves to always be available. So
things happen a lot faster.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Gentlemen, thoughts? Lars, Wayne?
Yeah, I would agree, Devin. I mean, I think that's a great point, and just something that we should think about. One of the points that I'll make is, relative to time and making time and leveraging technology for time. I think Devin made a point earlier. He could be out, right, championing the cause for bringing employees together. So, a huge part of this and leveraging point for more ideation is actually holding, sessions with the employees to ideate and understand how can we improve, and how can we improve anything from process, product, or delivery, right? So those are the things that I see, where we can really create some improvements, some more employee engagement. And we're it's almost to the point where we never get a chance to take advantage of the new time that's leveraged by technology. But that would be one way for sure that I would say, we could again continue to advance. There's a lot of great case studies out there where diverse group of employees just come together and be challenged on what can we do differently. We have this great set of products, goods, and services. What can we do differently in the marketplace? And just by leveraging that and doing some ideation sessions, can create some great impact on the organizations as well. PepsiCo, the example at PepsiCo was an additional 2% of gross revenue, which was about $260 million in their first year of selling guacamole chips. And it was time allocated for employees. It was the employee networks to come together and actually leverage. The question was simply, what can we do differently? And it was their Latin and Hispanic heritage group who said, wow, we got this great dip. We got this great chip. Why don't we put the guacamole flavor on the chip? So, that's time to innovate, right? So I agree. And then Lawrence kicked off, with that as well. We're talking about the time element of this. And so there's a lot of great case studies out there where employers have gained major impact to drive the business. And I'm sure, Devin, that's probably a way where you've been able to drive HR into a revenue center versus a cost center because of innovation and ideation.
Yes. Just to quickly touch on that subject, it truly is like, if we weren't able to leverage automation to a certain extent, there would be no time for me and my team to go out and figure out, like, how do we make money? I don't want to be a cost center anymore. I want to be a profit center. And being able, so it took a little bit of time at first to figure out what we could automate. But then as we were able to automate it, we were able to leverage and innovate. And that's probably been the most fun I've had in my whole entire career, is having that time to really think outside the box and figure out, like, we're talent, we're often talent solutions, but how can we innovate and be different? What is the edge we're going to have? And we wouldn't be able to really get deep and think about that if we weren't embracing some of the automations that now exist. So yeah, absolutely.
Lars, any thoughts on this? I'm going to double down on this question in a minute. So maybe you want
to. No, I think it's worth doubling down. I'd just say this very quickly. We, if you look at Gallup's proprietary tool called the Q12, there's one of the questions there that it's something along the lines of, I have a best friend at work. And if you think of that, you kind of go, well, listen, we're in a North American culture, or an American culture. Friends at work, we call them friends, but are they really friends? I think what the question is really getting at, are you close enough to the people that you feel loyal enough to, withstand or challenge, take on any challenge? And the more I've thought of this, the more I've actually, I dismissed it at first. And then I quickly came back to it, and I keep coming back to it. How do we ever expect for our employees to have a best friend at work, for all of what a best friend at work constitutes?
Yeah.
We don't give them it's time, but environment, it's space, it's all these different things. I mean, and no, that's not what a work environment is defined as, but it sure would be fantastic if that's what it ultimately became.
Yeah.
So if you actually went to work with people that you are friends with, knowing full well there need to be some boundaries, right? I mean, it's still a professional setting, so you can't just be best friends with everyone at work. At the same time, though, I mean, just think of the outcomes, just the benefits that we can't even realize, we can't even conjure up when people are actually really good friends. So I think it's much more about trying to study human nature and how human nature intersects with business, with commerce, with technology, as opposed to the reverse. I think we've looked at commerce, business, technology, and its impact on humans. I think it should be in reverse.
Yeah, so I'm glad you're once again kind of on the edge of where I was going to go with this on the double down comment. So when you think about the role of relationships, again, back to time. So and I was going to go along the lines of the emerging generation in the workforce, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We hear a lot about the fact that the younger generation, Gen Z and others, are deferring or not having children, for example, right? They're focusing on their careers. At the same time, they're lamenting that they don't have close friendships that are forming at work because of the lack of an environment. We're now in a more virtual environment, a more digital environment. There's not necessarily a workplace where they're gathering. They're not hanging out, going out to restaurants or bars, developing friendships the way that we had the privilege to do so in our career. And that's an opportunity and a challenge that we have as well in that respect. At the same time, when you look at, that delay or deferring of starting families, it raises the question, like, what's all this for, right? What's the purpose? What's our work purpose? What's our life purpose? We know as human beings, back to your point about human nature, that part of our biggest growth comes from some level of struggle and challenge, right? So if we're automating everything to the point that's quote unquote easy, and we've removed the friction, we then have to create some new friction. We all know, back to time, we have an abundance of time. We're all going to fill that time. There's no shortage of stuff for us to do, whether it be tasks at our workplace or tasks in our home or tasks in our community. So to your point, how do we get better at starting to solution set this together, right? In the workplace, out of the workplace, for these different structures and systems? Because we also hear across the board, it seems like across organizations, across the culture, people are yearning for that community. They're yearning for that sense of belonging to and inclusion, to your point, William, of true inclusion, belonging. People have a voice, they're contributing, they're seeing the impact of their work. And we also live in we're balancing the demands of how's the evolution of business going, that we're no longer, it's not just about growth maximization of our revenue and profit. It's about developing our people. It's about developing our families. It's about developing our communities. And how do you do that in a new lens of KPIs and metrics that are shifting and evolving to reflect the demands of consumers, of the public, of the employees that work in our companies, right? And so I love this conversation because these are big ideas and it's being rooted in something that's real and tactical right now with this technology, but it shows the level of questions that are going to start arising here, and we're just in the beginning of this, right? And back to the ethics and morals of this, back to purpose, back of contributors, and we see the role this has on well-being, on mental health, on all aspects of health. And keep in mind of financial health. I mean, these are all questions that are now starting to arise because what is the value of an increment of work? What's the value of an increment of an hour? What about fractional employment where we can work for different employers, right? As an example, these are real topics that we as HR and cultural leaders are now wrestling with. And so I'd love to hear any of you want to riff on any of that. There's a lot in that. So it's not necessarily a question as much as a rant, but I would welcome you all to pile on that. So.
Derek, listen, I think you, I mean, it's a cauldron of different things. But I think it's perhaps the hardest thing for us to solve. I honestly don't have a good answer. The best I can tell you is I don't think big problems get solved by thinking about them once or twice or having a few people wax on what the solution is and they walk away and say, you know what, I think we've solved it. I honestly think this is ongoing. I think we need to, if we are smart, we would bring all constituents into the discussion. This can't be a group of executives that go off, at an offsite and come back and say, we figured out exactly what you guys, need to do or how this organization will be led. I think we need to bring multiple stakeholders into the discussion. Part of the development I mentioned earlier in my introduction around my kids, part of my development has been to use them as a sounding board and things that direct and lead our family. And it's not where we going out to eat or where's vacation. It's some really big, significant challenges that my wife and we all have that we need to start bringing them into the equation. That's an analogy, but the point is to say that everyone, I think, has some level of perspective that I think could be valuable or could be the cheat code to helping us figure out a big problem like the one you just described.
Thank you, Lars.
I want to jump on that. I 100% agree. Man, solving this problem is about continuous dialogue, in my opinion. We have to constantly be talking about it. We have to have an idea and then iterate off that idea. And sometimes things that we try might not work, but you continue to talk about it. And sometimes the ideas will change. Like I'll just use like a real simple example. When everybody moved to work from home, because we were forced to during COVID, we were like, a lot of companies were like, we'll do a little happy hour to create that inclusion and create that. And guess what? First call we had for happy hour was like 3,500 employees popped on. Second call, it was 2,000. And then after a few months, you'd get 100 people, right? And so it was a great idea at first. It solved the problem initially, and then it was like, it doesn't solve it anymore for me. Right. So I just doubling down on what Lars is saying, like it is about engaging. And when we started to get better at this company in this new environment, it was because of the ideas that we were leveraging from employees. Because he's right. Like you don't just go away to an executive retreat and come back and say, this is what's going to make you all happy. It's actually taking the time to, like you say, grab stakeholders from different parts of the business, from every level as well, from the entry level to the executive, and give them a voice because they're all going to value different things. Entry level employees are going to value certain experiences within the company way more than mid-senior, right? Like entry level employees, like way more paycheck to paycheck, way more like cost to benefits, as opposed to, somebody who's mid-senior, a little more comfortable and along their way, they may be way more concerned about, what does the 401k look like? Like how am I going to maximize the future? Just a very different thought process. So to get those voices together, and to continue that dialogue, critical. Absolutely.
I'll go right ahead. David.
Go ahead.
Derek, thank you for the double down. I'll just add an application, right? An application based example to this is, and I guess the question we also have to solve for is, are we driving tech or is tech now driving us? Right. And so in some cases, it's yin and yang. I mean, some cases we need tech to drive some of the work and drive what we're doing and then that integration point, right? So at some point of intersectionality there, but it does take that continuous dialogue the application of this that I'll share is, again, using tech to sometimes really generate some really heavy either feedback, ideation, or driving innovation with the employees to get that true, honest feedback. Because I know we do it a lot in person, or we do it a lot in a personable setting, but I've had the opportunity to participate and facilitate some employee voice sessions. And what's one of the connotations we say employee voice? Because we see no faces on screen, but we only see what they type in. And so, the system that I've used before is totally anonymous. And everyone gets an ANON number, like ANNO 125. They get an anonymous number, and so they join in that perspective. Now, we can also do some demographics on the front end. We can do some demographic questions on the front end, but again, not always. Some people are not always comfortable about doing that, especially in the smaller size organizations. Larger size organizations, 10%, 20% of the organization to participate in some activity like this is very rewarding, because we get to ask questions and get answers that we would not normally get in the face-to-face interaction. And so really understanding that slice of the pie between all of our generations in the workforce now, especially that Gen Z population that's coming in fast and furious, and really be, budding to be the next largest component of the workforce, and really just planning for that, especially from an HR standpoint, having that understanding. And Derek, you mentioned a lot of it in your setup for this about how they are seeing the workforce, how they're integrating into the workforce. But being able to ask some really hard questions to that group or the total workforce, doing it in an anonymous setting, I've found that we really get an understanding of how they operate in our workforce and what they expect from us as an organization, because we do get to ask some hard questions. And what's cool is you get to actually do some deep diving, I'll call it. Because if ANON 207 says, senior management is not supportive enough. Okay, so ANON 207, can you expand on why senior management? Can you give me a specific? So in my facilitation, I was able to deep dive and they'll respond, well, we don't have enough days off. There's more days off for the year, or, I don't get follow-up and feedback quick enough. So we can really create a setting where we can get that type of feedback.
I appreciate you sharing that approach that you're doing, the technology you're doing, William. I think it's very helpful. And I would love to hear the other gentlemen here share their perspective on some practical things that are doing around specifically this topic of how do we create personalization, right? When you think about this multi-generational, you gave voice to this, Devin. Everyone's got different needs and different priorities per se, depending on some of these criteria. It's not even generational, it's life circumstantial. But based on that, how do we then provide tools and support, to address the business priorities and the individual needs, so that we foster that sense of engagement, that sense of cultural belonging, that sense of everyone having the voice and sense that they're being listened to specifically. And that allows us to respond, and then it allows us to further foster that level of trust and openness. So anything
okay. We're doing some practical stuff. It feels easy, but it's so impactful. From an HR standpoint, being able to go in there and meet with employees from different departments, and to, as much as possible, be kind of this neutral party. I always joke when I pull employees together and say, like, this is Las Vegas, like the point here is for you to talk about what you've experienced, what you're feeling, all of those things. And my job here, so I guess take a step back. Like, when we go about this, what we do is let's say a dev team just finishes a sprint. And rather than, simply just have a postmortem on how it went, I come in and I do a postmortem with the team on how did it feel? How did this thing that you just did, you got done, how did it feel? So boss is gone, leader is gone, and now it's us. And we start with some ground rules. We make it feel safe. We get everybody's buy-in before we ever start talking about any subject whatsoever, we make sure that we write them on the board. These are all the things that we're agreeing to so that the space is as safe as possible, and then letting them know that I'm just here to collect thoughts, to create some dialogue. And then what I do is I will summarize these things and I will be your voice to the leaders here at this company and say, look, here are some things that we're missing. Here's some things that we're not hitting on. Here's some things that we need to adjust. And we've been doing that for about a year. Your question was, are there some practical things that we're doing? We've been doing it about a year, and it has really kind of guided in a lot of ways how we go about setting ourselves up for sprints, setting ourselves up for things like open enrollment, benefits, like a really, one that comes around all the time. Settings, sometimes we just do them just to see, like, okay, we had a couple, as a startup, we had a couple of months that were a little bit, rough as startups go. We got ourselves out of that space, and then pulling employees together and saying, how you feeling right now? Let's everybody else out of the room. It's just us. What was missing? What was happening? What were we not doing when things got tough? And so they're just a few ideas on some practical things that we've been doing that have been impactful for us.
Hey, Derek, ours has been equally as practical, and frankly, I would say, to the extent a company can try to avoid the things that are too colorful where you can't sustain them. So I think the more practical it is, the more likely you are to sustain them. But very simply, we've opened the lines of communication as much as possible and tried to define, maybe not formally, but tried to define what each platform or venue is designed to bring about. So our town halls, while we expect Q&A, that's not the place for intimate dialogue around things that should be in a more safe environment. We have tons of skip levels, tons. I mean, we do 5 or 6 skip levels a month. The executive team, the next level down, there's a constant flow of information, constant flow of information. I think the most important thing that we've done over an arc of time is appropriated the right response. It's not so much what gets said, what gets discussed, it's how you respond to it as an executive team. And I think if you can demonstrate in a tangible way that you're listening, one, that you're open to being honest with the employees on what you can and can't do. I think they greatly appreciate it. I think people can handle bad news more than we give them credit. But two, that we're willing and prepared, to take some tangible steps to act on some of the feedback that they've provided us. I think if you can put that into a nice cycle over a period of time, I think you'll get a positive response. Look, our employee survey over the last 2 years has jumped by 0.1, which you go, that's not a lot. 0.1 based on Gallup, who's our provider, is significant. A 0.1 increase is very significant. And when we look at key attributes as to why that's increased, I think a lot of it comes down to a certain degree, it comes down to that open dialogue. Again, we can't do everything. You can't, and I don't think employees want to feel or believe you can do everything, but I think you have to be open to listening, and it's all about your response.
Yeah, I think just on the last kind of following that thread, I think you raise an interesting, so I completely agree, one, that employees and people in general can handle bad news better than we oftentimes as leaders and organizations can fathom. At the same time, going back to where you started, William, words matter. We live in a very sensitized time related to how things are communicated, expectations around how things are communicated, the sense of what does it mean to be psychologically safe in an environment, right? And I know from talking to other peers, this is a wrought with issues conversation around how do we balance performance-based dialogue with empathy and compassion? How do we balance conversations that are inclusive at the same time that we're talking about hard, challenging, taboo topics at times? And those are areas that are wrought with people being triggered, and we have to get better at equipping the skills around communication, both for our managers and our leaders, but also for the emerging employees that may not have any background on some of these areas. And so maybe just a final thought on what each of you might be doing, either personally or professionally in your organization, to address that. Would love to hear you all share some of that right now as we close up the session. Hard to believe we're already at the tail end of our conversation. So thank you guys.
Sure, I'll jump in very quickly and just say, Derek, it's I talked about that evolution. We've all been through these uh, business strategy evolutions. What worked in the 40s and 50s may not work today, right? Someone's wrote a new book about it. We got I share in Devin's story of taking cost centers to profit center. I've done it twice now in my career with DEI, moving from HR to emerging markets because of the give there. But I would say, again, talking about that evolution again that we're faced with as, either from a human resources experience, from personnel management to human capital strategies to total inclusion. And it is making sure that intersectionality plays a part in those discussions, right? And so, great research out there by Scott Page, right? University of Michigan, around homogenous teams and the decision making, the exponential rigor that decisions go through because you have those diverse teams and those diverse minds at the table. And that homogenous is also diversity of thought, right? And so not only ethnicity, race, and gender, but also diversity of thought. But ensuring that that process exists and allowing for time for it to happen, I think for us is really the critical factor going forward. And as we heard both from Lars and Devin, I mean everything from those skip meetings to having a chance to get out and walk the workforce wherever they may be around the world is extremely impactful for the work that we're doing today. And I'm excited to actually, have those conversations as well, whether we're talking Hanoi, Sydney, Australia, Brazil, Mexico City, New York, or LA. Those are the conversations we get to have to constantly keep our finger on the pulse so we can move the workforce to become high performing teams.
Derek, my final thought. I mean, I have to reference a great book that I read, and I think many of you have either read it or heard of it. It's called Radical Candor. I mean, it's just so fascinating. It's so fascinating when you really just think of the great dilemma we have as leaders. It is not to give people feedback. It's not only to make great decisions, although that's a big part of it. It's to care personally and to challenge directly. I mean, I think if you could hit that sweet spot every time in your personal life and your professional life, I think you have the making of a great organization, be it family or professional setting. It's more of a wish as I wrap up that I wish my one legacy is that someone would describe me as someone who was prepared to be radically candid with them. I think that's probably the most profound thing.
Awesome. I'm going to make sure that I hold you to that, Lars. So thank you.
Yeah, please.
Devin.
I love both of what you just said, and I would agree. And then the other thing I would add, Derek, you said, are there any things we're doing personally in regards to these things? And for me, and I think this goes for HR's wanted a seat at the table for so long, and I know that's kind of an overused term, the HR field. We want a seat at the table, like we want to be strategic, all of those things. Like when you get it, when you have that opportunity, like really embrace this idea of being the subject matter expert in terms of your people, right? Like keep your finger on the pulse, really understand what's happening, really understand what's shifting and what's changing, right? It's easy to fall into a very just stagnant, almost not, there's no innovation because you have this well-oiled machine. But I think as the leader, and one of the things that I'm focusing on is constantly almost benchmarking what we're doing versus everybody else to make sure that in ways that really count, not just trying to keep up with the Joneses here, but in ways that really count, that I have my finger on what's going on, and so whether that's attending as many of the events and conferences and listening to podcasts like this one, that I can make sure that I am that for my company, and that trickles down and across the organization as well. So
well said. I could go on a whole tangent about that topic as well in the future of leadership and where that's coming from, of organizations, and how HR is influencing that on a multiple level. Maybe we'll do a follow on that. So, gentlemen, I appreciate you all sharing your time and your wisdom and your hearts with us. I know each of you as friends, and I really value that you're all heartful leaders, truly rebels with a heart, but you're also pragmatic thinkers and executors of your work. And just really appreciate you making the time to be part of our community, and welcome officially to the Rebels of the Heart community, and to all of our guests who join us either live or who watch this recording later. Thank you for your continued followership and all you're doing in your organizations to build greater cultures of caring and belonging and performance. So with that, have a blessed day. We will talk soon.
Thank you.
Care.
Thank you.